it is, Blueies and Chewies. Big Pooch here with you, just to walk you through, namely, my takeaways from each team in the Six Nations thus far, and certainly a player that I think would compare, potentially early doors, but a big shout, to the South African great Henry Honeyball. So a certain fly half in the Six Nations that I think you can compare to Henry Honeyball. I'll let you know that in just a bit. But first up, a couple of big bits of news. Felix Jones, the South African love coach who followed Rusty Erasmus from Munster and supported the Springboks through 2 World Cup winning campaigns, joined England and left not long into his stint, citing cultural issues within the organisation. If we can all remember Chase in the Sun, the first one with Aled Walters, the brilliant Welsh performance coach. He also moved on. Again, not happy with the English environment. Steve Borthwick is being framed as certainly an Eddie Jones type dictatorship. But good news for South African fans. It should be interesting to see where he fits in, how he helps the team, given Tony Brown, from an attacking point of view, was brought in. That's probably where most of his support for the Springboks previously lay. And obviously he joined England to support their defence. We saw the rush defence implemented in the last Six Nations. So where will Felix Jones support the team? I'm sure it'll be across the board. The man is extremely knowledgeable. He's obviously got huge credibility in the bank, not only with Rusty, but the South African fans. And the players will warm to him. So a big coup for South African rugby, rather. And another big news. Warren Gatland, Welsh rugby legend, it must be said, despite this last stint, Warren Gatland will go down as one of the greatest coaches in rugby history. He leaves Welsh rugby a couple of weeks back after what was an extremely poor run of, 14 under his belt, losses in a row. Warren Gatland did amazing things with the Wasps earlier on in his career. He had a wonderful stint, really, with the British and Irish Lions. I remember the big call he made to drop the famous one and only Brian O'Driscoll from the third test against Australia. They eventually defeated Australia in that third test to win the series and drew against the All Blacks. It was possibly the series against South Africa that may have been the slow decline of Warren Gatland. You think about South Africa post-2019 World Cup not playing any rugby in the lead up to the British and Irish Lions, barring one test against Georgia. There was certainly European rugby that was happening for a good 12 months, albeit, under COVID conditions. The tactics employed by Gatland must have been questioned. You saw what Finn Russell did in cameos, and I think there was a bit of injury doubt, but he had Dan Biggar, I think, pass the ball 3 times in the second test, really just putting the leather through it on every occasion. Very one-dimensional. Warren, I think it was Gatland ball. I think it really just became outdated. We went back to the Chiefs, had a very poor stint with the Chiefs over the COVID period. I think he was moved upstairs into a directorship role. Missed out on a couple of big coaching gigs with Tier 1 nations. And it almost seemed like Wales weren't going to get anyone better. Gatland was available. It was mainly a sort of marriage of convenience from my point of view. And look, not to begrudge Warren Gatland, he's not really working with a lot. I've got one big issue with him in terms of selection. I'll get onto that in a sec. But ultimately, 14 games in a row really does put a sour taste in everyone's mouths in Wales. And unfortunately, an icon of Welsh rugby leaves with a cloud looming over his head, and it's off to new beginnings for Wales. Where they go will be interesting to see. But that's a nice little segue into Wales itself. And look, I'll be brief on Wales. They have been extremely poor. How and why Warren Gatland did not have Anscombe at 10 over the last few weeks is beyond me. Solid operator, good distributor, far better than what they've got. and in a team that is seeking confidence, that needs a foundational player that can really set up good plays, as we saw against Ireland. They were terrific against Ireland, really stretching their defence. Whether there was a deteriorated or no relationship at all with Anscombe, I'm not entirely sure. But it really made no sense for Gavin Anscombe not to be playing for Wales. Wales in itself, like I said, not all the blame lays at Gatland's feet. The Welsh regions are in disarray, like much of professional rugby, certainly in the club game. Very selfish, very insular, don't look at the bigger picture, financially literate, and therefore that leads to poor performance on the pitch and overall affects the national team. And this has been a long and slow decline for Welsh rugby after a golden generation under Gatland. Outside of what we've seen, Lake at hooker, Morgan, the captain, the flanker, and maybe some interesting wingers. Moving forward, it's going to be a rough road ahead, and I think it's really any coach coming in, the challenge or the modus operandi would really be to make them competitive. I think that's all you can hope. That they're taking teams down to the wire. That they're challenging the bigger nations, England, Ireland, and France in particular. But I certainly think it's going to be a long road ahead for Wales moving forward, no matter who they get in. Now for the Italians, the Azzurri. A little bit of what to expect from Italy. I mean, they had a brilliant campaign last time round, missed out on beating France with a draw and a missed kick at the end. It really should have been slotted against France last year, leaving with 2 wins and a draw. The campaign really, this time round, really relies on sneaking past England this weekend. I can't see them beating Ireland the last game, especially if Ireland have got a Grand Slam and will certainly be in with an opportunity to win the Six Nations, even if they do lose against France this weekend. Performance, or how this Six Nations is viewed, really comes down to this weekend. We've seen them get off to a poor start against Scotland, sort of not really at the races early on, and then build into the game and actually make it a really competitive game up until sort of middle of the second half. And Scotland finally got cracking and into gear and finally took away the game from the Italians. They were competitive for the first 30-odd minutes against France before getting absolutely blown away in the second half in particular. But really, similar to Scotland, a slightly weakened pack versus the capability and talent that they've got in the back line is really what the forwards can do matching up against a big English pack. I think if they can see a bit of parity this weekend, away from home, backs against the wall, really they've got nothing to lose here, Italy. They've got to make a game of it. They've really got to make a game of it and get the likes of Brix and Minicello on the ball as much as possible, making gain lines and securing the ruck ball. The Scots, I said at the start, my last podcast, I said this Six Nations will be the defining Six Nations, or the defining period for Gregor Townsend, a Scottish rugby legend himself, and by all means he's done a brilliant job with Scotland. But unfortunately the loss against England this last weekend, where they really threw the game away. For me, it's time to move on from Gregor Townsend. He's been there for a long time, and not to say that he's done a bad job, but I think the risk of potentially going backwards, the opportunity that there is to make the most of what is a golden generation of rugby players for Scotland, certainly the best team I've seen in 10, 15 years for Scotland. They really need to now make that tough decision. Whether they go with a Ronan O'Gara, I mean, he's Irish, would he take the job? Would he be welcome? The South African Franco Smith has done a great job with Glasgow Warriors. And move Gregor Townsend, upstairs. Is there a opportunity for him to get involved in a directorship of performance or rugby, potentially? But I think the idea of always being the early men, always being the men where it's going to be their year this year, and then it never really eventuates. They've had the wool over England for the last few years. That's really been the shining light for Scotland, but they've just not been consistent outside of that in terms of beating any of the big teams. There's been some hallmark results against France away from home. Again, that was during the COVID period. They've not managed to overcome Ireland in many years. Got to be able to win more of the big games, and that's where, unfortunately, I think they need a new voice in the room with a different perspective. Really try and make the most of this talented group, because I think you've got to go for broke in this situation. And Gregor Townsend's had a really good run, but I think now's the opportunity for a new voice in the change room, hopefully impact the players slightly more differently, and whether the Scots can really give it a good crack for Six Nations in the next 1 to 2 years before we start seeing the Finn Russells and the like, really reach their latter stages of their career. I would have hoped for a little bit more from Blair Kinghorn at full-back after how he's been playing for Toulouse. Rory Dodge has looked good in spurts. I must say Finn Russell, I think, has been poor overall. My assessment has been poor. I still think he's a front runner for the Lions fly half, but more so because of the credibility in the bank, and the likelihood is that he will be playing behind a better forward pack for the Lions moving forward, which will allow him to play to his strengths. But the kicks at the weekend, the intercept against Italy, and so there is a little bit of jeopardy there for him, but I think he'll have the credibility in the bank for the Lions number 10 jersey. England. Well, where do you go with England? The rugby gods are shining down on England. If they weren't over the last 12 months, not to say that they weren't their own worst enemy, they are certainly shining down on them now. Competitive first half against Ireland before not really firing a shot all game. I thought the Curries were just really keeping them in the game, especially that first half. France, good performance by England. You've got to give them credit ultimately. France didn't put them away. England really seemed to build into a bit of confidence, a bit of momentum in that second half. And I think France did the typical French thing, which is, ultimately shrug their shoulders and think it's not their day. But they did well, certainly well. And I thought Finn Smith in that game was superb. Against Scotland, they really got away with one. They kicked their kicks, credit to them. The Scots totally outplayed them. Again, Tom Curry, who has been back to his best, really made some important steals for them against Scotland. On many occasions, Scotland should have built a bigger lead and taken the game away from England. The second half was very disjointed by both teams. Finn Smith was kicking the leather off it. I'm sure that was given from up above in the box, those instructions. But credit to them. 2 games on the bounce now with an opportunity, if they beat Italy and they beat them well, still in with a chance to win the Six Nations. The green shoots have certainly been Stewart and Hayes in the front row. Hayes came in on the against France, and I thought he was superb coming in off the bench. Stewart's scrummaging looked terrific. The big conundrum for me is Marcus Smith, who I think is a supremely talented player. Where does he go? I don't think he's a natural fullback. I think he can play fullback in the last 15-20 minutes of a game when the game opens up. And I don't think the centre combination is working with Slade and Lawrence. They've got to get Lawrence on the ball, crouching the ball up more often. So do they move Marcus Smith more running fly half to 12, or from my point of view, why not move him to 13 and get Lawrence crashing the ball, much like Damien Delande, Bundiyaki at 12, crashing the ball up and building some momentum in terms of attack from there. I think that's the big question, is what they do with Marcus Smith. Finn Smith, for me, is the Henry Honeyball comparison. The man is a beast in the tackle. Now, it is early doors. It is a little bit of recency bias, but I thought he blew the hinges off against France. I thought he was absolutely superb. He said he really struggled in the first 10, 15 minutes to get acquainted with the speed of the game. It's great to hear a player speaking so honestly with such vulnerability in this modern day era where we're all supposed to be fully with it and on top of it. But I think he looks a real talent. I know he's been highly touted at a very young Northampton team that have won the Premiership and went deep in Europe, but I haven't seen a lot of him. And what I have seen, though, in the last few games is outstanding. Now, what I would like to see, certainly against Italy this weekend, is more ball in hand, more Finn Smith against France, distributing the ball, see more ball in hand, see if he can make a few gain line breaks himself. In the tackle against Scotland, against France, good Lord, the boy's got shoulders of steel. He looks very impressive. And maybe that more distributing fly half over the running fly half of Marcus Smith, maybe that is the route forward for England, especially getting better value out of their backline. But I think the Slade-Ollie Lawrence combination just doesn't work. Slade, I don't think offers enough. I know he can kick off his left peg, but I don't think that's enough to keep him in the team. Doesn't offer enough going forward for me. So where Marcus Smith ends will be interesting. I'm really keen to see how Finn Smith develops. I think if it was another 12 months that he had before the Lions series, I would have him as a bolter to make the Lions 10 jersey. I still think he'll probably get on the flight, so it should be interesting to see how he fares. But moving on to Alain Albert, the French. I guess what we've seen from France is to be expected. We've seen absolute brutality from 130, 140, 150 kilo men in the starting 8. These lads are big boys, destroyers of men. And we've seen a supremely talented backline between Antoine Dupont and his cohort of extremely talented and exciting backline players against England. How many are counted? Bill Barry dropped one, Dupont dropped one, Pernod dropped one, Mouvakas I think was high and tough. I mean, he is a hooker at the end of the day, despite him being extremely mobile. But I think they had 4 or 5. You catch that pass, you've got a walk-in try. They lost it for me against England. And credit to England, like I say, in that second half, staying in it and really building their confidence. But after a big win against Italy, I know Nick Malla has said the French mentality is to pat themselves on the back. But they will know this is the big one. This is the El Classico of the Six Nations. It is down to the match against Ireland, away from home. I'll give you my prediction shortly, but it's going to be an absolute cracker, and I can't wait. The French will be well up for it. Galtier's made some big decisions at fly half, Pernod on the wing, sending those guys back to club rugby. I think there's a bit of a warning sign there that you're slacking off, not reaching your potential, and not performing to the best of your capability, and training hard will not be tolerated. I'm expecting a big performance by the French this week against Ireland. Before I'm moving on to the Irish, the post-Sexton era looks very interesting. Less rucks, less possession for Ireland, certainly over these last few games. I think they're in the 40%, where they typically operate in the high 50s, early 60s in terms of possession. So they're looking for outcomes more quickly and not looking to retain the ball as much as they did under Sexton. And I think that's twofold. One, to retain energy, especially as benches are now evolving to the South African way, 6-2-7-1. They've often been reluctant to move from a 5-3 bench. So actually looking for outcomes more quickly will conserve energy, especially if there's breakdowns in play for set piece. But equally, Johnny Sexton's no longer there. So they've moved on. I think Crowley's certainly in with a big shout to still play a lot of games for Ireland. But Prendergast, the talent that was highly touted by Irish insiders for many years, certainly is well justified. Now, he does look like a bag of bones in terms of, in the first test, he looked like all elbows and knees. So he's still growing into his body. He's still a target for me, as if I was coaching any team against him, I would be absolutely targeting from a defense point of view. He's still growing into his body, but I tell you what, he's got a boot on him and a bloody good pass on him. I mean, that pass off the left hand against Scotland, the 20 yards across, 25 yards across, brilliant. That is pure class. So the guy is hugely talented, growing into his body, but he's the new dawn of Irish rugby, and what a talented player. I thought they really lost an opportunity, especially in terms of the development for him against Wales. They go down to 14 players. Wales are playing terrific. There was a few times there to really build some set plays, build some momentum. Gibson Park, who I'm a huge fan of, and certainly without doubt the starting scrum half for the Lions, had a few tap and goes where there was an opportunity to kick for the line and build some structured plays to get back into the game. But I think the idea is, given Aki came on for the 20-minute red card for Ringrose, they were always going to overpower, outskill Wales. But for me, there was a really opportunity lost just for Prendergast to get a little bit of set plays that you would no doubt do against better teams, and not run the ball as flippantly as they were against Wales, and eventually overcoming them in a game that really they underperformed Ireland. This weekend, the CLASSICO. I've got Irish family, but I'm going the French 5-4. The French 5-4. I expect them to ruin the farewell of Ian Healy, Murray the scrum half, and Peter O'Mahony. I think they'll be playing their last games on home soil for the Irish. What great servants they've been. I just think that the French will be G'd up. I know they tend to slacken off after a strong performance, but I think Gautier has certainly got the bit between his teeth. I've got the French 5-4 in Ireland against the Irish, still allowing either team to win the Six Nations going into the last week. Scotland-Wales have got Scotland by 10. Scotland should play a more structured game. The forward pack should certainly see or match parity at least against the Welsh, allowing Russell to play his natural game. And I've got the Italians losing by 6, unfortunately. England by 6. I want to see Finn Smith with more ball in hand. I want to see him playing the game that he did against the French, distributing, making a few line breaks. Let's see what this kid has to offer. Is he a bolter for the Lions? Like I say, if he had another 12 months under his belt, I could see him starting, given what I've seen. I'm high on this guy. Finn Smith, what a player. That's it for Blueies and Stewies. Please like and subscribe, and appreciate all your support.